You know, in military history, there are some stories that they go way beyond simple wins and losses. They become legends. They get etched into a nation's soul, not because of the outcome, but because of the sheer, almost unbelievable courage shown when the odds felt impossible. Today we're going to talk about one of those stories, the last stand of Charlie Company, 13 Kumaon, at a desolate frozen pass called Razongla.
Okay, I want you to try and picture this. It's November 18th, 1962. You are at 17,000 feet up in the Himalayas. The air is so thin it literally feels like you're trying to breathe through a coffee straw. The temperature? It's a bone-shattering minus 30 degrees Celsius. It is so cold that an onion freezes as hard as a rock, and the moisture from your own breath forms icicles on your mustache. This isn't just a battlefield. It's one of the most hostile places on the entire planet. And right here in this frozen wasteland, a battle is about to start.
Then, in the pitch black before dawn, a voice crackles over the radio, and you can just hear the emotion, the desperation. Chani is finished. Chani has been turned to ashes. Now that wasn't a code word for something poetic. Chani was an Indian military post, and it had just been completely and totally overrun. That one desperate message, it was the signal that a massive, coordinated Chinese assault was beginning all across Ladakh, and for the men stationed at Razongla, it was a terrifying sign of what was coming for them next.
But how did we even get here? How did this desolate, forgotten mountain pass become the stage for such a monumental and tragic clash? To really get it, we need to rewind a little bit and look at the chain of events that set this all in motion.
And really, that's the core question we're trying to answer today. This isn't just a story about one battle. It's a story about clashing strategies, about a logistical nightmare, and about a political policy that puts soldiers in these impossibly vulnerable spots. So let's unpack how a handful of men ended up in this fateful final confrontation.
Okay, so to really understand Razongla, you have to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, what we're calling the Himalayan chessboard. Back in the early 1960s, tensions between India and China were getting seriously high over disputed land in the Himalayas, especially in a region called Aksai Chin. So, in late 1961, India kicks off something that came to be known as the forward policy. The idea was, well, it was simple, but man, was it risky. They decided to push troops way forward and set up dozens of tiny little posts, sometimes with just a few guys, right in the disputed areas. The goal was to physically block any more Chinese advances. It was basically a political statement, using soldiers as chess pieces to say, hey, this land is ours. The huge problem? These posts were often incredibly isolated, basically impossible to defend, and a total nightmare to resupply. And get this, look at the sheer speed of this thing. In just 16 months, India set up 65 of these new posts. 65! Think about that. These aren't huge bases. We're talking about tiny little dots sprinkled across a vast, unforgiving map. Each one of them was a massive gamble. This wasn't a slow buildup. It was a frantic rush to plant flags across thousands of square kilometers of high-altitude desert.
And this slide just lays out the stark reality of the whole situation. It's just a massive mismatch. On one side, you've got China, with a whole network of roads and fast trucks. On the other side, India, relying on treacherous mountain tracks, yaks, and ponies. Logistically, it was an epic mismatch. It truly was a test of human endurance for the Indian soldiers just to get their supplies. You know, when you're playing a game of chicken like this, a policy of pure brinkmanship, it's only a matter of time before something ignites. And in the summer of 1962, in the Galwan Valley, that's exactly what happened. So, in July of '62, a platoon of about 30 Gorkha soldiers sets up a new post way deep in the Galwan Valley. And almost immediately, I mean right away, they are surrounded. We're talking 350 Chinese soldiers closing in on them, getting as close as 45 meters. For days, it's this incredibly tense standoff. The Chinese even set up loudspeakers, blaring threats mixed with Indian music, trying to mess with their heads. The Gorkhas held their ground, but the message from the Chinese was crystal clear. We will use overwhelming numbers to surround and cut you off.
And here's the crucial thing. The soldiers on the ground, they knew. They knew how dangerous this was. An officer at that post in Galwan later wrote these words. There was this feeling that they were being put in these impossible situations for political reasons. They knew they were vulnerable, but their orders were to hold. It's such a powerful and honestly a chilling admission of their resolve, knowing a tragic end seemed almost inevitable. Which brings us right back to that frozen dawn on November 18, 1962. The larger war had now officially started.
The Chinese had launched these huge attacks all across the front, and now their focus zeroed in on one strategically vital ridge overlooking the Chushul Valley, Rezang La. Let's just pause here for a second and really let these numbers sink in. Defending Rezang La was C Company of the 13th Kuman Regiment. Their commander was Major Shaitan Singh. All told, they had 118 men. The attacking Chinese force, it was estimated to be well over 1,000 soldiers, and they were backed by heavy artillery and mortars. The Indian position had no artillery support of its own. None. The men of C Company were completely, and I mean completely, on their own. So, it's around 3 in the morning. It's pitch black, snow is swirling, and under the cover of all that, the Chinese begin their stealthy approach. The very first sign of movement is picked up by these small 3-man listening posts that were positioned a few hundred meters ahead of the main defensive line. Their whole job was just to be the early warning system.
Now here's where the story takes a turn and becomes absolutely incredible. The standard operating procedure, the rulebook, says a listening post reports enemy movement and immediately falls back. That's it. You are not supposed to fight. But the men at Rezang La, they had other plans. After they radioed in the warning, they defied their orders to pull back. They opened fire. These tiny 3-man teams held up the entire initial Chinese advance for nearly an hour, fighting until every single one of them was either killed or captured. They bought precious time for their friends, and they paid for it with their lives. The only reason we know this is because of the lone survivor of one of these posts, a man named Lance Naik Ram Singh. His story is it's beyond belief. After his post commander was killed, he took over the light machine gun. Soon, the other soldier was killed too. Ram Singh kept firing all by himself until a shell landed right next to him and blew off both of his legs. Even then, he tried to keep fighting before he finally passed out. I mean, that was the level of defiance, of raw courage on display that morning. So, after silencing those listening posts, the main assault began, and it was just relentless. The Chinese just threw wave after wave of soldiers directly at the Indian platoons. The Kumanis held their ground, their machine guns and rifles just cutting down the attackers. The first few waves were actually beaten back with huge Chinese casualties, but the numbers were just too overwhelming. Artillery was raining down, and the Chinese started to get around the Indian positions, attacking them from the back. Soon the whole battle just dissolved into this brutal close-quarters fight. Men were jumping out of their trenches, fighting with bayonets, with their bare hands. They fought until they ran out of ammo. They fought until they were physically overrun. But they never surrendered.
And right at the heart of this unbelievable resistance was their leader, Major Shaitan Singh. He was moving from trench to trench under a constant hail of fire, reorganizing his men, encouraging them. He was hit by a burst of machine gun fire in the stomach. He was mortally wounded, but he refused to be evacuated. He ordered his men to just leave him there and keep fighting. He continued to direct the battle until he finally collapsed. For that incredible courage and leadership, he was posthumously awarded the Param Vir Chakra, India's highest military honor.
The Battle of Rezang La was over. From a purely tactical view, the position was lost. But the story doesn't end there. Not even close. The aftermath, the legacy of what happened on that ridge, is what transformed a devastating loss into a national epic of valor.
So let's just look at the final toll. Of the 118 men of C Company who defended Rezang La that morning, 109 were killed in action. Only a tiny handful survived, and most of them were badly wounded and taken prisoner. The sacrifice was almost total. They had fought, quite literally, to the very last man and the very last bullet. Because of the brutal Himalayan winter, the area was completely inaccessible for 3 months. It wasn't until February 1963 that a recovery party could finally reach Rezang La, and what they found there was a haunting, heroic sight. The dead defenders were found frozen solid in their trenches, still at their posts, with their weapons still clutched in their hands, still pointing towards the enemy. The machine gunners were slumped over their guns. The riflemen were still in their firing positions. It was this silent, frozen monument to their final, defiant moments. A testament to a battle where absolutely nobody flinched.
And that's really where we have to leave it. The story of Rezang La brings up this incredibly powerful question, doesn't it? In a world that usually only remembers the winners, how does a story of tactical defeat become a legend? Maybe it's because it reminds us that there are ways to measure success that go beyond just holding a piece of ground. There's the measure of duty, the measure of sacrifice, and of a courage so pure and absolute that it shines through even in the darkest loss, inspiring generations for years to come.